I heard it from the parking lot. My own children's voices, clear as day through the half-open car window. Let her walk home, it's better for us. We can stop for drinks without worrying about time. That's when I knew, after 63 years of life and 40 years of motherhood, that I had become an inconvenience. Not a person. Not their mother. An inconvenience. My name is Margaret Chen, and I had just spent the entire afternoon at my youngest son David's daughter's 8th birthday party. I'd arrived early to help set up, stayed late to clean, and spent 3 days before that hand-decorating a 3-tier princess cake because Emily had mentioned months ago that she loved Belle from Beauty and the Beast. The cake alone had cost me $200 in supplies and countless hours of work with my arthritic hands. But when it was time to go home, apparently driving me the 15 minutes back to my apartment was too much of an inconvenience. I stood there frozen behind a minivan, grocery bags from the party supplies I'd brought in my hands, listening to my children, my 3 children, all in their 30s now, all successful, all the people I had sacrificed everything to raise, discuss whether it was worth the hassle of dropping their mother home. She can take the bus, my daughter Jennifer said. The 47 stops right at the park entrance. She takes it all the time. It's already 6:30 though, my oldest son Michael said, but not with concern, with calculation. By the time we drop her off and get back downtown, we'll hit traffic. Exactly, David chimed in. And we've been planning this dinner for weeks. Mom understands. She's always understood. That last part. She's always understood. That's what broke something inside me. Because he was right. I had always understood. When they forgot my birthday because of work meetings. When they canceled Sunday dinners because of their children's activities. When they needed me to babysit but were too busy to help me move furniture or drive me to medical appointments. I had always understood because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice. We accommodate. We understand. But standing there in that parking lot, invisible behind a stranger's vehicle, I realized I had spent 40 years teaching my children that my needs didn't matter. And they had learned that lesson perfectly. I didn't confront them that evening. I watched them drive away, waited 20 minutes for the bus in the cooling October air, and rode home alone just as they'd suggested. But during that bus ride, looking out at the city lights and the other passengers, elderly people like me, workers heading home after long shifts, teenagers with their whole lives ahead of them, I made a decision. I was done being an inconvenience. I was done being invisible. And I was going to make sure my children remembered exactly who I was and what I was capable of. You see, my children knew I had money saved. What they didn't know was exactly how much. What they didn't know was that their quiet, understanding mother who took the bus everywhere and clipped coupons, and lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, had been making very strategic financial decisions for the past 25 years. Let me back up. Let me tell you the story of how I got to that parking lot, and then I'll tell you what I did next. Because the journey from devoted mother to woman who bought a bus company is longer than a 15-minute car ride they couldn't be bothered to give me. I was 23 when I married Robert Chen. He was the most brilliant man I'd ever met. An engineer with patents, with vision, with a future so bright it seemed to generate its own light. I had been studying architecture at university, had dreams of designing buildings that would change skylines and communities. But 2 months after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant with Michael. Robert and I discussed it and we decided, or rather Robert decided and I agreed, that our family would be best served by traditional roles. He would build the career. I would build the home. For the first few years, I threw myself into motherhood with the same passion I'd once reserved for drafting and design. Michael was a colicky baby who barely slept, and I walked endless miles around our small apartment, bouncing him and singing until my voice gave out. 17 months later, Jennifer arrived, and I had 2 in diapers, 2 sets of needs, 2 little humans who depended entirely on me for survival. Robert's career flourished. He was traveling constantly, speaking at conferences, consulting for major firms. The patents started generating serious royalty income. We moved from the apartment to a small house, then from the small house to a large house in a prestigious neighborhood. The money flowed in and Robert controlled all of it. Not maliciously. He wasn't cruel or manipulative. He simply believed that since he earned it, he should manage it. And I, exhausted from childcare and isolated in my new role, didn't fight him on it. When David was born, I was 31. 3 children, all under 10. My days blurred together in a cycle of school runs, homework help, meal preparation, laundry, cleaning, and the endless emotional labor of managing a household. Robert was home maybe 3 nights a week. When he was home, he was affectionate with the children but largely absent from the actual work of raising them. That was my domain, my responsibility, my purpose. But here's what no one tells you about giving up your dreams for your family. You don't stop being the person who had those dreams. Late at night, after everyone was in bed, I would sketch building designs on scrap paper. I would read architecture journals at the library while the children were at school. I would drive past construction sites and imagine what I would have done differently, how I would have solved problems, what I might have created. And I watched our finances. Robert might have controlled the accounts, but I paid attention. I noticed when the royalty payments increased. I tracked when his consulting fees doubled, then tripled. I understood that we were becoming genuinely wealthy, even though my weekly grocery budget stayed the same, and Robert complained when I suggested hiring help with the housework. When Michael was 12, Jennifer was 10, and David was 6, Robert came home on a Wednesday afternoon, which was unusual. He sat me down at the kitchen table, the one I'd found at an estate sale, and refinished myself, and told me he'd met someone else. Her name was Clarissa. She worked at his firm. She was 26. He was leaving. The divorce was swift and, in his mind, generous. He gave me the house, which was fully paid off and worth about $400,000 at the time. He gave me monthly child support of $3,000 until the children were 18. He offered me a one-time settlement of $100,000. In exchange, I would waive any claim to his future earnings, his patents, his retirement accounts, and his business interests. I had been out of the workforce for 12 years. I had 3 children to raise alone. I had no college degree, no recent work history, no professional network. My lawyer, the one I could barely afford, told me to take the deal. My parents told me to take the deal. My friends told me to take it and be grateful because at least I got the house. So I took it. But I wasn't grateful. I was calculating. That $100,000 became my secret. I told no one about it except my accountant, a sharp woman named Patricia Kim who I'd met through a neighborhood mothers group. Patricia and I sat down for what was supposed to be a 30-minute consultation and turned into a 3-hour planning session. "You're starting with a significant advantage," Patricia said. "You have a paid-off house, steady child support, and capital to invest. If you're smart and patient, you can build real wealth. But it means living well below your means for a long time." "I've been living below my means my entire marriage," I replied. "What's another 20 years? We created a strategy. I would live off the child support, which covered our basic expenses in the paid-off house. The $100,000 went into a diversified investment portfolio: stocks, bonds, real estate investment trusts, index funds. Every tax refund, every birthday check from relatives, every dollar I could scrape together from buying generic instead of brand name, from cutting hair at home instead of at salons, from selling unused items at garage sales, all of it went into investments. I also went back to school. Not to architecture. At 35 with 3 children, that dream was dead, but to accounting. I studied at night, online at the community college. It took me 7 years to get my bachelor's degree. By the time I finished, Michael was in college, Jennifer was applying, and David was in middle school. The degree opened doors. I started doing bookkeeping for small businesses, working from home so I could still manage the household. The income was modest at first, maybe $15,000 a year. But it was mine. Robert's child support paid the bills. My income went straight into investments, and I watched those investments grow. Patricia had been right, patience and strategy paid off. My original $100,000 turned into $200,000 within 5 years, then $400,000 within 10. I reinvested dividends, rebalanced quarterly, took calculated risks during market downturns when stocks were cheap. I lived in the same house, drove the same car, wore the same clothes. My children thought we were lower middle class, scraping by on child support and mom's modest bookkeeping business. They never knew about the growing portfolio. They never knew that when David turned 18 and the child support ended, I had $800,000 invested. They never knew that I sold our family house for $700,000. The neighborhood had appreciated significantly, and moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment that cost half as much, investing the difference. By the time I was 60, my net worth had crossed $2 million. By 63, I was sitting at just over $3 million. I lived on $40,000 a year from my bookkeeping business and Social Security, which had started at 62. The investments kept growing, compounding, building wealth that my children couldn't imagine their coupon clipping. Bus riding mother possessed. But here's the thing about being invisible. No one sees what you're doing. My children visited occasionally, holidays mostly, and when they needed something. Michael would bring his wife and 2 children over for Sunday dinner every few weeks, but he'd spend most of the visit on his phone, answering work emails. Jennifer lived across the country and called on my birthday and Christmas. David lived closest, just 20 minutes away, but I saw him maybe once a month unless he needed me to babysit Emily. I babysat a lot. I was the reliable one, the grandmother who always said yes. Emily's school had a half day? Call grandma. Date night? Call grandma. Sick day and both parents had important meetings? Call grandma. I showed up every single time, reliable as sunrise, because I loved my granddaughter, and because I remembered how hard it was to juggle work and parenting. But the reciprocity was missing. When I had a medical procedure last year, a minor surgery, nothing serious but requiring someone to drive me home from anesthesia, I asked David first. He said he had a work commitment he couldn't break. I asked Michael. He said it was his son's soccer game and he couldn't miss it. Jennifer was across the country. I ended up paying for a medical transport service $200 to drive me 3 miles from the surgical center to my apartment. When my car broke down 2 months ago, the transmission finally died after 18 years. I asked if anyone could help me research new cars. Michael sent me a link to Consumer Reports. Jennifer suggested I Google it. David said he'd try to find time but never did. I spent 2 weeks taking buses and rideshares to look at dealerships, negotiating a loan, figuring it out alone. I bought a modest used sedan, paid cash, and told no one because clearly no one was interested. The birthday parties were the worst. My birthdays, my 62nd birthday, they forgot entirely. No calls, no cards, nothing. Michael remembered 3 days later and sent flowers with a note apologizing for being busy. My 63rd birthday, 2 months before that parking lot moment, Jennifer video called me from Seattle. Michael's wife reminded him and he took me to lunch, but he picked an inexpensive restaurant and split the check with me. David gave me a gift card to a grocery store, which felt more like a utility payment than a present. But their birthdays, their children's birthdays? I showed up with handmade gifts, thoughtful presents, contributions that took weeks of planning and effort. For Michael's 40th, I'd compiled 40 years of family photos into a leather-bound album, writing captions and memories for each image. Took me 3 months. He flipped through it at his party, said, "Thanks, Mom, this is nice," and set it aside. I don't think he's looked at it since. For Jennifer's 38th, I flew to Seattle, using miles I'd saved for years, and spent a long weekend helping her renovate her guest room. We painted, installed new fixtures, assembled furniture. It was lovely, actually one of the best visits we'd had in years. But 3 weeks later, when I suggested maybe she could visit me for Thanksgiving, she said Seattle to our city was just too expensive and too much time away from work. The irony wasn't lost on me. And Emily's birthday parties. I'd been to every single one since she was born. I'd made elaborate cakes for each. A carousel for her 4th, a unicorn for her 5th, a garden scene for her 6th, a underwater mermaid scene for her 7th. This year, the bell cake had taken 3 full days of work. My hands had ached for a week afterward. The arthritis was getting worse, but the look on Emily's face when she saw it had made it worth it. I'd also brought a gift, of course. Emily loved reading, so I'd bought her a collection of classic children's books, first editions I'd found at estate sales over the past year. Beautiful hardcovers of Alice in Wonderland, The Secret Garden, and of Green Gables' Little Women. The set had cost me nearly $500, but these were investments. Books that would appreciate in value and, more importantly, feed a child's imagination. Emily had loved them. She'd hugged me and said, "Grandma, these are the most beautiful books I've ever seen." That hug had felt like everything. But apparently, providing handmade cakes and thoughtful gifts and hours of labor and unconditional love wasn't enough to warrant a 15-minute car ride home. The bus ride that evening took 45 minutes with stops. I sat near the back, my grocery bags on my lap, and thought about everything I'd given my children over the past 4 decades. Not just the obvious things, the sleepless nights and sacrificed career and endless domestic labor, but the less visible gifts. I thought about the time Michael was 17 and crashed his father's car while driving without permission. Robert wanted to press charges to teach him responsibility. I fought for hours, argued, pleaded until Robert relented. Michael never knew I did that. He thought Dad just forgave him. I thought about when Jennifer was in college and got involved with a manipulative boyfriend who isolated her from her friends. I drove 6 hours every weekend for 2 months, taking her to lunch, slowly rebuilding her confidence, helping her see the relationship clearly. When she finally broke up with him, she thanked her college advisor and her best friend for supporting her. She never mentioned me. I thought about David's wedding 5 years ago. His fiancée Rachel had a complicated family situation, and neither of her parents were contributing financially. The wedding they wanted cost $40,000. Robert contributed nothing. He and Clarissa were divorced by then, and he'd made it clear his financial obligations to our children ended at 18. David and Rachel were young, just starting their careers, drowning in student loans. I anonymously paid for $20,000 of their wedding expenses, funneling money through the wedding planner so they'd think they'd gotten discounts and deals. They thought they were just lucky and budget savvy. They never knew. 40 years of invisible labor. 40 years of sacrifice. 40 years of being the safety net, the reliable one, the mother who always understood. And it had culminated in my children deciding that an extra stop on their evening was an unacceptable inconvenience. I got home that night around 8. My apartment was silent and dark. I made myself tea, sat at my small kitchen table and opened my laptop. I pulled up my investment accounts, my retirement funds, my carefully built portfolio. $3.2 million to be precise. $3.2 million that my children had no idea existed. I thought about what I could do with that money. I could will it to them, of course. That's what they probably expected if they thought about it at all. When old Mom finally died, they'd settle the estate and discover she'd been far from poor. They'd split a small fortune and congratulate themselves on what a good job she'd done managing her modest life. Or I could spend it while I was alive. I could travel, buy a beautiful home, enjoy my final decades in comfort and luxury. That seemed fair. I'd earned it, after all. But as I sat there sipping tea, my hands still aching from cake decorating, my legs tired from standing all afternoon at a party where I'd been treated as free labor, an idea began to form. It was audacious. It was dramatic. It was possibly insane. It was perfect. The next morning I called Patricia Kim. She'd remained my accountant and financial advisor for 27 years, and over that time we'd become friends. She knew my situation, my children, my history. She was one of maybe 3 people in the world who knew the full extent of my financial success. Patricia, I said, I need to buy a bus company. There was a long silence. Then, Margaret, I'm going to need significantly more context. I told her about the parking lot, about the conversation I'd overheard, about 40 years of being convenient when they needed me and inconvenient when I needed them, and then I told her my plan. The city's transit system is partially privatized, I explained. Route 47, the route I take several times a week, is operated by Northside Transit Solutions, a small company that holds the contract for 4 bus routes in this district. I researched them last night. They're family-owned, struggling financially, and the owner is approaching retirement with no succession plan. Their annual revenue is about $2 million, but they're barely breaking even. I think they'd sell. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Margaret, this is not a typical investment strategy. I'm not looking for a typical investment strategy, I said. I'm looking to make a point. By buying the bus company your children suggested you take home? Exactly. That's the most extra thing I've heard in my entire career, Patricia said. I love it. Let's run the numbers. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia and I worked 16-hour days analyzing Northside Transit Solutions. We reviewed their contracts with the city, their fleet maintenance records, their staffing costs, their route profitability. The company operated 12 buses across 4 routes. They were indeed struggling. Aging fleet, high maintenance costs, thin margins, and an owner, Gerald Hoffman, who was 72 and exhausted. I reached out to Gerald through a business broker, expressing interest in acquiring the company. We met at a cafe downtown. He was a tired-looking man with kind eyes and grease under his fingernails, clearly someone who still worked on his own buses when needed. "Why do you want to buy a bus company?" he asked me directly. "You don't look like a private equity firm." "I'm not," I said. "I'm a woman who relies on public transportation and sees an opportunity to run the business more efficiently, while also improving service." "You know about bus operations?" "No," I admitted. "But I know about accounting, about financial management, about efficiency, and about hiring people smarter than me to handle what I don't know. I've spent 25 years building wealth through strategic investments. I see your company as undervalued and mismanaged, not through incompetence, but through underinvestment and outdated practices." He laughed. "That's the politest way anyone's ever called my business a mess." We talked for 3 hours. Gerald told me about the struggles of running a transit company, the city contracts that barely covered costs, the constant equipment failures, the difficulty finding and retaining good drivers, the endless regulations. He also told me he'd built this company from nothing 40 years ago, and letting it go felt like losing a child. "I get that," I said. "I raised 3 children over 40 years. I understand building something from nothing and then having to figure out what it means to let go." Something in my tone made him look at me more carefully. "This isn't just a business investment for you, is it?" "No," I admitted. "It's not." "Good," he said. "Businesses run better when people care about more than just the bottom line." We negotiated for a week. Gerald wanted $1.8 million for the company. Patricia's analysis suggested it was worth maybe $1.2 million in its current state, but could be worth $3 to $4 million with proper investment and management. I offered $1.5 million all cash, with the condition that Gerald stay on for 6 months as a consultant to ensure smooth transition. He accepted. The paperwork took another 3 weeks: due diligence, city contract transfers, regulatory approvals. I kept it completely quiet. My children had no idea what I was doing. I saw David once during that period when he called asking if I could watch Emily on a Saturday, because he and Rachel wanted to attend a wine tasting. I said yes, spent 8 hours with my granddaughter at the zoo and the museum, and said nothing about the fact that I was in the process of acquiring a transit company. The deal closed on a Tuesday in mid-November. I became the owner of Northside Transit Solutions, 12 buses, 4 routes including Route 47, and 18 employees. I met with the entire staff that afternoon. "My name is Margaret Chen and I'm your new owner," I told them. "I'm sure this is unexpected. I'm 63 years old, I've never run a bus company, and I'm sure some of you are worried about what this means. So let me be clear about my priorities." I pulled out a document I'd prepared with Patricia. "First, everyone here is getting a 20% raise, effective immediately. Second, I'm implementing a new health insurance plan that will reduce your out-of-pocket costs by half. Third, we're replacing 4 buses immediately and the rest within 18 months, newer, more efficient vehicles that will be easier to drive and maintain. Fourth, I'm hiring 2 additional mechanics so maintenance isn't constantly falling behind. And fifth, I'm establishing a driver bonus system based on safety records, customer feedback, and route efficiency." The room was dead silent. Then one of the drivers, a woman named Teresa who I later learned had been with the company for 15 years, raised her hand. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you invest all this money in a struggling bus company?" I smiled. "Because I ride these buses. I know the routes, I know the drivers, I know how hard you all work for wages that don't reflect your value. And because I can afford to do this right, which means treating employees well, serving passengers well, and building a sustainable business." "But what's your real reason?" another driver, Marcus, asked. "Nobody buys a bus company out of the goodness of their heart." "My real reason," I said, "is that I want to prove that invisible work has value. Drivers are invisible to most passengers. Bus riders are invisible to many people in this city. And I've spent 40 years being invisible to people who should have seen me. So this is me making sure that everyone involved in public transportation, drivers, mechanics, riders, is visible and valued." They didn't entirely understand, but they didn't need to. They understood the raises and the better insurance in the new buses. That was enough for now. I spent the next 2 months working 18-hour days learning everything about bus operations. Gerald was true to his word, teaching me about route management, city contract negotiations, fleet maintenance, driver scheduling, and the thousand small details that keep buses running on time. I hired an experienced operations manager, a woman named Donna Reed who had worked for the city's main transit authority for 20 years. I brought in a fleet manager, updated our accounting systems, renegotiated our maintenance contracts, and established relationships with city transit officials. I also made one very specific operational change. Route 47, the route that ran past the park where Emily's birthday party had been held, needed some minor schedule adjustments. Working with Donna, we optimized the timing to improve connections and efficiency. The route became more reliable, wait times decreased, and ridership started increasing. My children still had no idea. I saw them for Thanksgiving, hosted at my apartment as always. I cooked for 3 days, preparing everyone's favorites. They arrived, ate, chatted about their lives, and left within 2 hours of finishing dessert. Michael mentioned he'd gotten a promotion. Jennifer talked about a work trip to Tokyo. David shared photos of Emily's soccer games. No one asked what I'd been doing. No one noticed that I seemed different, more energized, more purposeful. Same old mom, David said as he was leaving. Always here, always reliable. Same old me, I agreed, thinking about the 12 buses and 18 employees and complete transit operation I now ran. Christmas came. I bought thoughtful gifts for everyone as always. My children got me a joint gift. A gift basket of generic bath products, the kind you buy in bulk at warehouse stores. The card was signed by all 3 of them, but in Michael's handwriting. They clearly coordinated on spending as little effort as possible. I smiled and thanked them. I didn't mention that I'd just approved bonuses for all my transit employees, totaling $40,000. I didn't mention that I'd bought 2 new electric buses that would be delivered in January. I didn't mention that I was negotiating for 2 additional routes with the city, which would expand my company's operations and revenue by 30%. In January, the new buses arrived. They were beautiful, clean, efficient, accessible, equipped with USB charging ports and digital displays. I organized a small ribbon-cutting ceremony with the mayor and city transit officials. Local news covered it. Northside Transit Solutions expands with new electric fleet. The article included a photo of me standing next to one of the new buses, scissors in hand, smiling. The caption read, "Margaret Chen, owner and CEO of Northside Transit Solutions, celebrates the company's expansion and commitment to sustainable public transportation." That article went live online on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, my phone was exploding. Michael called first. "Mom? MOM? Is this real? Are you the Margaret Chun who owns a bus company?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Is there a problem? Is there a mom? When did this happen? How did this happen? Do you know what you're doing?" "I bought the company in November. It happened through a fairly standard business acquisition process. And yes, I know what I'm doing. I've been learning and I've hired excellent people. But why didn't you tell us?" "You didn't ask what I was doing," I said simply. "When did you last ask me about my life?" He stammered something about being busy. I let him flounder. Jennifer video called from Seattle, her face a mask of shock. "Mom, I just saw the article. I had to check 3 times to make sure it wasn't someone with the same name. You own a bus company." "I do." "Since when do you have money to buy a company?" "I've had money for quite some time, Jennifer. I've just been quiet about it." "How much money are we talking about?" "Enough," I said. "Enough to buy a transit company, certainly. But you live in that tiny apartment. You clip coupons. You take the bus everywhere." "I take the bus because I now own a bus company and like to evaluate my own service," I said. "I live in my apartment because it suits my needs. And I clip coupons because I find it entertaining and it's a good financial habit. Having money doesn't mean wasting it on unnecessary expenses." David showed up at my apartment that evening, unannounced. "Mom, we need to talk." "About what?" "About the fact that you apparently own a business I knew nothing about. About the fact that you have money we didn't know about. About the fact that you've been lying to us." "I haven't lied once," I said calmly. "I simply didn't volunteer information you never asked about. When's the last time you asked me about my finances, David? Or my business? Or my life beyond when I was available to babysit?" He looked stung. That's not fair. Isn't it? When's the last time you asked me about anything that didn't involve you needing something from me? We include you in things. You were at Emily's birthday party. Yes, where I made an elaborate cake for 3 days, brought expensive gifts, helped set up, helped clean up, and then overheard you tell your siblings to let me take the bus home because driving me was inconvenient. The color drained from his face. You heard that. I heard that. I was standing behind the blue minivan in the parking lot, holding bags of party supplies I'd brought. I heard all 3 of my children discuss what an inconvenience it would be to drive their mother home. Mom, we didn't mean. Didn't mean what? Didn't mean that I'm an inconvenience? Because you very clearly stated that letting me take the bus was better for us. You wanted to go to dinner without the hassle of a detour. I understand. I've always understood. That's been my role for 40 years. Understanding, accommodating, fitting myself into the gaps of your lives without ever asking you to inconvenience yourselves for me. That's not true. We love you. I don't doubt that you love me, David. But love without consideration, without reciprocity, without basic respect isn't enough. And that parking lot conversation made me realize that I'd spent 4 decades teaching you that my needs don't matter. So I decided to show you and myself that they do. By buying a bus company? By buying the bus company whose route you suggested I take home. Yes. He stared at me. That's incredibly petty, Mom. No, I said. Petty would be refusing to watch Emily or holding grudges or cutting you out of my life. This is strategic. This is me taking resources I built and using them to create value, for myself, for my employees, for the community. The fact that it also sends a message to my children about my worth is just a bonus. What message? That I'm not just Mom. I'm not just Grandma. I'm not just the reliable babysitter and cake maker and person who always understands. I'm a person with resources, intelligence, capability, and agency. I'm a person who deserves basic consideration and respect. I'm a person who, when told to take the bus, bought the entire bus company. David left shortly after, clearly stunned. I made myself dinner, a simple soup and salad, and thought about whether I'd been too harsh. But no, I decided. Harsh would have been attacking them, insulting them, cutting them off. Truth-telling isn't harsh. It's just uncomfortable. The next few weeks were awkward. My children clearly didn't know how to process the new reality. Michael tried to be supportive, asking questions about the business, but I could tell he was also worried about his inheritance. Jennifer seemed almost impressed, which was nice, but also kept fishing for financial details I wasn't willing to share. David was hurt and defensive, alternating between apologizing and justifying his actions. I let them process. I had a business to run, and run it I did. Within 3 months, our on-time performance had improved by 30%. Customer satisfaction scores were up. We'd won the bid for 2 additional routes, which we'd start operating in April. Revenue was increasing, and with the operational efficiencies we'd implemented, we were actually turning a decent profit. I also started a new initiative: free bus passes for seniors over 70 and for families below the poverty line. The city agreed to subsidize part of it, and I covered the rest from company funds. It reduced our per-passenger revenue slightly, but increased ridership significantly, and served the community in meaningful ways. A local journalist did a feature story on me. From passenger to CEO, one woman's journey in public transit. I told a modified version of the story. A regular bus rider who saw an opportunity to improve service and had the financial resources to make it happen. I didn't mention the parking lot conversation. That was private. But I did talk about the invisibility of bus drivers and riders, about how public transportation is essential infrastructure that deserves investment and respect, about how I wanted to prove that valuing employees and serving the community could also be good business. The article went mildly viral in transit and business circles. I did a few interviews. Someone created a social media post calling me the most boss grandma of the year. It was all very unexpected and slightly overwhelming, but also satisfying in ways I hadn't anticipated. The real shift came in March, at what would become a pivotal family dinner. I'd invited everyone to a nice restaurant, my treat, because I had an announcement. They arrived curious and cautious. Emily came too, which delighted me. At 8 years old, she was bright and observant, and I wanted her there. Once we'd ordered, Michael asked, "So what's the announcement?" "I'm making some estate planning changes," I said. "And I wanted you all to understand what to expect." I could see them tense. Estate planning meant inheritance, which meant money, which had become the elephant in every room since January. "I currently have assets of approximately $3.4 million, I said, watching their eyes widen. "That includes the bus company, my investment portfolio, retirement accounts, and savings. I'm 63 and in good health, so hopefully I have a couple decades left. But I want to be clear about my plans." "3.4 million? Jennifer whispered. "How?" "Strategic investing over 27 years, I said. "Living below my means, making smart financial decisions, and benefiting from compound interest. It's not complicated, just patient." "And you never told us?" Michael asked. "Why would I? You never asked about my finances, and frankly, it wasn't your business. It's still not your business, except that I want to be transparent about expectations." "So what are you planning?" David asked quietly. "I'm dividing my estate into 4 parts. 25% will go to each of you. The remaining 25% is going into a trust that will fund college education for my grandchildren, Emily and Michael's children, and any future grandchildren." I watched relief cross their faces. They were still getting the money. They hadn't been cut off. "However," I continued, "there are conditions." The relief turned to wariness. "Each of your inheritances is locked in a trust that will pay out over 10 years, not as a lump sum. The trust includes provisions requiring that you demonstrate active involvement in my life, regular visits, inclusion in family events, genuine relationship. If in any year you fail to maintain meaningful contact, that year's distribution is redirected to the grandchildren's education fund." You're bribing us to spend time with you?" Jennifer asked, sounding hurt. "No," I said firmly. "I'm establishing that relationships require effort. I'm not interested in deathbed reconciliations or guilt-motivated visits after I'm gone. I'm interested in my children, my adult children who have their own lives, making space for their mother in those lives the same way I made space for them in mine for 40 years. "That's manipulative, Mom," Michael said. "Is it? Is it manipulative to expect that the people who will inherit my wealth also invest their time? You'll collectively inherit over $2.5 million. I'm asking for what, dinner once a month? Inclusion in holidays? Phone calls that aren't just asking me to babysit? That seems like a reasonable exchange." "You're our mother," David said. "We shouldn't have to be bribed to see you." "You're right," I agreed. "You shouldn't." But the parking lot conversation last October made it clear that without some structure, I'll remain an afterthought, convenient when needed, inconvenient otherwise. I'd rather have honest relationships built on mutual effort than continue being taken for granted. Emily, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "I think Grandma's smart. You guys do kind of forget about her until you need something." Out of the mouths of babes. My grandchildren looked mortified. "Emily," Rachel said sharply, but I held up a hand. "She's observant," I said. "And she's not wrong. I'm not angry about it. I enabled it by never setting boundaries. But I'm 63, not 93. I have life left to live, and I want to live it surrounded by family who choose to be present, not obligated but genuinely engaged. The trust structure ensures that." "Can we contest this?" Michael asked. "You can try," I said. "I've worked with excellent attorneys. The trust is ironclad. But more importantly, do you really want to? Do you really want to be the children who fight their mother's very reasonable request for involvement in exchange for significant inheritance?" Silence around the table. I let it sit. "I'm not trying to punish you," I said more gently. "I'm trying to build something better." The parking lot conversation hurt, but it also clarified things. I realized I'd been so accommodating, so understanding, so invisible that you genuinely didn't see me as a person with needs and feelings and worth beyond my utility. That needed to change. "By buying a bus company," Jennifer said, a slight smile on her face. "By buying the bus company," I confirmed. "Sometimes you have to make dramatic statements to be heard." David looked at me for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm genuinely sorry about the parking lot, about not driving you home, about all of it. You're right. We've taken you for granted. I appreciate that, I said. And I don't want apologies as much as I want change. I want to be someone you think to call with good news, not just someone you call when you need childcare. I want to be included in your lives because you value my presence, not because you're checking a box for inheritance. The inheritance shouldn't even matter, Michael said. We're all doing fine financially. Then the trust conditions shouldn't be difficult to meet, I pointed out. If money doesn't matter, then investing time in relationships should be easy. More silence, but this time it felt different. Thoughtful rather than defensive. Emily broke it again. Grandma, can I come visit the bus company? I think it's really cool that you own buses. I would love that, I said. Maybe we can arrange a tour, and you can meet the drivers and see how everything works. That would be awesome. Rachel smiled, genuinely smiled at me. She's been talking about you nonstop since the article. She told everyone at school her grandma owns a bus company. Well, I do, I said. And it's been the most interesting thing I've done in years. I'm learning constantly, working with great people, serving the community. It's given me purpose beyond being available for everyone else's needs. I think it's incredible, Jennifer said suddenly. I've been processing all this for months, and I was stuck on feeling like you'd lied to us. But you didn't. We just never asked. We never saw you as someone with a full life beyond being mom and grandma. And that's on us. Thank you for saying that, I said. Can I ask something? Michael said. What would you have done if we'd offered to drive you home that night? Would you still have bought the company? I thought about it. Honestly, I don't know. I'd been thinking about next stage life plans, about what to do with my resources. But the parking lot conversation was the catalyst. It showed me that I needed to make a statement to you and to myself about my value and agency. So maybe I would have found a different way to make that statement. Or maybe I would have stayed invisible for another decade. I'm glad I didn't have to find out. Dinner continued, less tense. We talked about the business, about their lives, about Emily's school. It wasn't perfect. There was still awkwardness, still processing, but it felt like a beginning. Over the following months, things slowly changed. Michael started calling on Sunday evenings just to chat. We'd talk for 30 minutes about everything and nothing. His work, my business, local politics, family gossip. It became a routine I looked forward to. Jennifer planned a trip home in May specifically to spend time with me. Not for a holiday or obligation, just to visit. We spent 3 days together, touring the bus operations, having long dinners, talking about her life and mine in ways we hadn't in years. She told me about her struggles at work, her complicated feelings about not having children, her fears about the future. I told her about the loneliness I'd felt for years, the complexity of watching your children build lives that don't include you, the unexpected joy of running a business at 63. We cried together. It was healing. David's change was the most significant. He came over one evening in April without Rachel or Emily and just asked, "Can we talk?" We sat on my apartment balcony watching the city lights and he said, "I've been thinking about the parking lot every day since you told me. And I've realized that wasn't the first time. It's not like we suddenly started being dismissive. We've been taking you for granted for years." "Yes," I agreed. "You have. Why did you put up with it?" "Because I loved you. Because I thought that's what mothers do, sacrifice without complaint. Because I enabled it by never pushing back. Because I was afraid that if I demanded more, you'd give me less." "That's awful," he said quietly. "We made you feel like your needs were a burden." "Sometimes, yes. But David, you're a parent now. You understand how complex it is. You love Emily more than anything, but you're also exhausted, overwhelmed, focused on keeping all the plates spinning. I get it. The difference is that I need you to also get it, to see that I'm still a person, still here, still worthy of consideration." "The trust conditions," he said. I was angry at first. But I've been thinking about it and they're not unreasonable. They're sad. It's sad that you felt you needed to create financial incentives for your children to maintain a relationship. It is sad, I agreed. But it's also practical. And honestly, I don't think any of you are doing it just for the money. I think the structure gave you permission to prioritize it, to see it as important rather than optional. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe we just needed the wake-up call." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then he asked, "Are you happy?" With the business, with everything. I am, I said. Genuinely happy. I wake up with purpose. I work with people I respect. I'm contributing to something bigger than myself. And I'm finally being seen by my employees, by the community, by you all, by myself. I'm glad, he said. And I'm sorry it took something this extreme for us to wake up. Better late than never, I said. The bus company continued to thrive. By June, we'd added 3 more routes. We were operating 15 buses with a staff of 28. Revenue was up 40% over the previous year under Gerald's ownership, and profit margins were healthy. I'd become a minor figure in local business circles, serving on the Chamber of Commerce and speaking occasionally about small business ownership and public transit. I also started mentoring other women, particularly older women considering second-act careers. A local community college invited me to speak to their non-traditional student program, adult learners returning to education. I told them about going back to school at 35, about building wealth slowly and strategically, about the power of patience and planning. Several women contacted me afterward, looking for advice. I started meeting with them for coffee, sharing what I'd learned, encouraging them to see possibilities beyond their current circumstances. Emily's school did a project on local businesses, and she chose my company. I gave her a complete tour, let her interview drivers and mechanics, showed her the operations center and explained route planning. She created a presentation that won first place in her class. But more than that, I watched her understand that her grandmother wasn't just a cake baker and babysitter. I was a business owner, a leader, a person with expertise and authority. The way she looked at me changed. The way she talked about me to her friends changed. That shift, being seen fully by my granddaughter, might have been the most satisfying part of everything. In August, we had a family vacation. I rented a beach house for a week and invited everyone. In the past, I would have done all the cooking and cleaning while everyone else relaxed. This time, I hired a chef service and a cleaning service. I told everyone up front, this is a vacation for me too. We're sharing responsibilities equally. And they did. Michael handled breakfast. Jennifer organized activities. David managed the grocery shopping. Rachel coordinated meals. Emily helped where she could. I relaxed, swam, read books, enjoyed my family without being the default caretaker. One evening, sitting around a bonfire on the beach, Jennifer said, "This is the best family vacation we've ever had." "It is," Michael agreed. "I think because we're all actually present. Nobody's on their phones constantly or running off to work calls. We're just here. And Mom's not exhausted from taking care of everyone," David added. "I didn't realize until this week how much work you did on past vacations." "A lot," I said simply. "But I let you not notice because I didn't want to complain. I'm glad this is different." "Me too," Rachel said. "And honestly, Margaret, watching you build this business has inspired me. I've been thinking about starting a consulting practice, going independent instead of staying at my corporate job. You proved it's possible to start something new, even when you're not 25. "It's absolutely possible," I said. "It's terrifying and exhausting and challenging in ways you can't imagine. But it's also invigorating. There's something powerful about betting on yourself and discovering you were right to do it." Emily, who had been quiet building sand castles by the fire, looked up and said, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be like you. I want to own something important." "You can own anything you want, sweetheart," I told her. "But remember, the most important thing you can own is your own voice, your own choices, your own life. Everything else is just details." "That's what Mom says you did," Emily said. "She says you took back your life." I looked at Rachel, surprised. We hadn't talked about it in those terms. "That's exactly what you did," Rachel said. "You spent 40 years being what everyone needed you to be. Then you decided to be who you wanted to be instead. It's inspiring, but it's also a little heartbreaking that it took so long." "Maybe," I said. "But better at 63 than never. And honestly, I needed those 40 years. I needed to raise you all, to learn patience and strategy, to build the financial foundation that made this possible. Everything happened when it was supposed to happen." The vacation ended with everyone helping to pack and clean unprompted. David drove me to the airport without being asked and waited until I was through security before leaving. Jennifer sent daily texts for weeks afterward, sharing photos and memories from the trip. Michael mailed me a framed photo of all of us around the bonfire with a note. "Thank you for showing us what family really means." Fall brought new challenges and opportunities. The city approached me about expanding operations to include paratransit services for disabled passengers. It would require significant investment, specialized vehicles, additional training, regulatory compliance, but it would also serve a community need and provide steady contract revenue. I said yes. We ordered 4 wheelchair-accessible vans and hired 6 additional drivers, all of whom went through extensive training. We partnered with local disability advocacy groups to ensure we were meeting actual needs, not just checking bureaucratic boxes. The program launched in November to overwhelmingly positive response. That same month, Emily asked if she could do a school presentation about entrepreneurship, using me as her example. She interviewed me for hours, asking thoughtful questions about risk and decision-making and business strategy. But she also asked personal questions. Were you scared when you bought the company? Do you ever miss just being a grandma? Are you proud of what you did? Yes, sometimes and absolutely. Her presentation was titled My Grandma, the Bus Boss. She talked about my life, my business, and the importance of never giving up on yourself. But what struck me most was her conclusion. My grandma taught me that it's never too late to change your story. She was invisible for a long time, but then she decided to be visible. Now everyone knows who Margaret Chin is. The presentation was recorded and somehow made its way to social media. Within days, it had thousands of views. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of feeling invisible, of family dynamics that undervalued their contributions, of finding the courage to make dramatic life changes. Women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, sharing how my story had inspired them to reconsider their own possibilities. I started getting speaking requests, local organizations, business groups, women's clubs. I began accepting a few, talking about entrepreneurship, about family relationships, about the power of strategic patience. The speeches weren't polished. I was a bus company owner, not a professional speaker, but they were authentic, and people responded to that authenticity. Christmas that year was different from any we'd had in decades. Everyone came to my apartment, but this time it felt like a celebration rather than an obligation. Michael and his family arrived early and stayed late. Jennifer flew in 2 days before and 2 days after, maximizing our time together. David brought ingredients to cook dinner together as a family project. Emily gave me a handmade book titled The Bus Company Grandma, illustrated with her drawings of me standing next to buses, wearing a business suit and a crown. The story inside was simple but perfect. Once there was a grandma who rode the bus. Her family forgot she was important. So she bought the bus company and reminded everyone that grandmas can do anything. I cried. Happy tears, proud tears, grateful tears. Do you like it, Grandma? Emily asked anxiously. I love it more than anything I've ever received. I told her, and I meant it. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my quiet apartment with Emily's book in my lap and reflected on the year. 12 months earlier, I had been invisible Margaret, reliable Margaret, understanding Margaret. I had been a convenience, a service provider, a background character in my own family's story. Now I was CEO Margaret, bus boss Margaret, the grandmother who had rewritten the rules and reminded everyone, including herself, of her own worth. The business was thriving. We'd expanded to 8 routes, employed 35 people, and were generating nearly $4 million in annual revenue. More importantly, we were providing excellent service, treating employees well, and contributing meaningfully to the community's transportation needs. My relationships with my children had fundamentally shifted. They saw me now, really saw me, as a complete person with intelligence, resources, and agency. Our interactions were more balanced, more reciprocal, more genuinely engaged. The trust conditions had worked exactly as intended, not as financial coercion but as structural encouragement for the relationships we all actually wanted. And I had discovered something about myself that I'd forgotten during those 40 years of service and sacrifice. I was capable of more than I'd imagined. I could learn new skills, take calculated risks, lead teams, build something meaningful. I could be brave. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned to be visible, to myself and others. I had spent 4 decades accommodating, understanding, fitting myself into the spaces others left for me. The parking lot conversation had been devastating. But it had also been liberating. It had forced me to ask, what do I want? What do I deserve? What am I capable of? And then it had given me the motivation to find out. The bus company was never really about transportation. It was about transformation, mine, my family's, and in small ways, my community's. It was about proving that invisible work has value, that invisible people have power, that it's never too late to change your story. A year later, at Emily's 9th birthday party, everything was different. I still made her cake, an elaborate castle design that took 3 days and left my hands aching. I still brought thoughtful gifts. I still helped with setup and cleanup. But when the party ended, David didn't even consider letting me take the bus home. "Ready to go, Mom?" he asked, keys already in hand. I thought we could stop and get ice cream on the way. Emily fell asleep in the car, but she asked me earlier if you could tell her more stories about running the business. "I'd love to," I said. As we drove through the city, past the bus stops where I'd waited so many evenings, past the routes my company now operated, I thought about visibility and invisibility, about worth and recognition, about the power of refusing to accept being overlooked. I had heard "let her walk home, it's better for us," and decided to buy the bus company. It was the most audacious, dramatic, empowering thing I'd ever done. It had changed everything: my life, my family's understanding of me, my own sense of possibility. And as we pulled into my apartment complex, David helping his sleeping daughter from her car seat, Emily stirring and smiling when she saw me, I realized that I was no longer the woman who rode the bus because she had no choice. I was the woman who owned the buses because she'd chosen to own her own life. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to remain invisible. Sometimes you have to make dramatic statements to be heard. And sometimes, when people suggest you should disappear into the background, the best response is to step boldly into the foreground and remind everyone exactly who you are. I'm Margaret Shen. I'm 64 years old. I own a bus company, employ 35 people, and serve my community every single day. I'm a mother, a grandmother, a businesswoman, and a person who learned that it's never too late to refuse to be taken for granted. And next time someone suggests I should just take the bus, I'll smile and say, "I'll take my bus, thank you very much." Because that's what happens when you stop being invisible. You start owning everything: your choices, your value, your story, and yes, sometimes even the bus company.